Good morning, everyone. Good to be with you, and welcome to winter. We were reminded of that this morning. I was not expecting what I saw on my vehicle this morning, as I'm sure you were not. It's 2023. It's winter. We're wintering in Quincy, Hannibal, the Mississippi River Valley, and wherever our audience is today by Zoom. Maybe you're wintering in the Florida Keys, or maybe that island getaway. But we are wintering and we are dealing with winter. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. It's always a pleasure to be here. And to all of you, wherever you're located today, if you're joining us by Zoom, I would love to hear from you. The last year has ended. The new year lies before us. This is the time we human beings traditionally take stock. It's the time we make New Year's resolutions in more agricultural societies, and my grandfather was in that. I remember very, very well on that cotton farm so long ago, what we did in winter. Some of you may have had that experience. To think about what had happened in the current year, what you're going to do for the next year, repair the equipment, and think. A little bit of time, not quite as frantic as the rest of the year. We do this because all of us are a little discontent. Shakespeare said it well. Now is the winter of our discontent. There's something in our genetics, something in us as human beings that make us a little uneasy, a little unsettled, clearly discontent. It's the push that propels us to fix that window and the air that's coming through. Why not leave it to warm weather? To build a better mousetrap. It has been with us from the beginning. It propels us to the moon and to Mars. Our literary ancestor, Homer, the blind poet, wrote about that discontent 3,000 years ago in the Iliad and the Odyssey. The restlessness that leads us to explore what lies behind the mountain, what's on the other side of the world, to build better and better ships so that we can cross the oceans, and the medical knowledge to heal a broken leg. I listened to an archaeologist describing what civilization was, and she said she was able to recognize civilization when she found a skeleton with a healed leg. It was the turning point when people stayed in one place long enough and were able to care for someone who had been injured long enough for that leg to heal. That's civilization. Ulysses in the Odyssey wanders the world, searching, probing, trying to find out what is there. the quest for knowledge, the quest for the truth. As humans, our explorations have led us in many directions. Think about these explorations of history, and I'm only listing a few. Marco Polo, who spent 20 years of his life going to China, 1271. And think how much we owe to him. He brought back spaghetti to Italy. Ferdinand Magellan, circumnavigating the earth in 1519. Christopher Columbus accidentally discovering the New World, 1492. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, 100 miles away from us in St. Louis, setting off on a 2.5-year scientific exploration of the West. Mapping, collecting minerals, collecting plant life, animal life. They did not know what was out there. In fact, President Jefferson told them, when you're out there, I just received some bones I've been examining. They're woolly mammoths. Keep your eye out. They may still be there. That's how much we knew. Journalist Henry Stanley, in his epic quest through Africa to find a man standing there in a village, and remember that famous scene when Stanley walks up and says, "Dr. Livingston, I presume?" The only white man within hundreds of miles, Dr. David Livingston. Robert Peary and Matthew Henson going to the North Pole. In 1909, Roald Amundsen, who discovered the Northwest Passage finally and conquered the South Pole in 1911. Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay conquering Everest in 1953. And you and I probably watched on live television a man named Neil Armstrong. And those famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," as his boots touched the surface of the moon. An epiphany is a sudden recognition of truth. Mark Twain illustrates this in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. My favorite scene in the entire wonderful novel, when Huck has decided he must turn Jim in. He has been told in church by the minister that if you did not turn in a runaway, you were going to hell. And so Huck decides he has to turn him in. He writes a letter. He gets in the canoe. They've spotted lights. They're heading actually toward Cairo. And Huck starts paddling the canoe down the Mississippi to those lights. And he suddenly realizes, in the clarity of a blinding sunrise, I can't do it. He tears up that letter he has written telling where they can find Jim. And he says, well, I'll just go to hell. Because in that clarity of that moment, Huckleberry Finn, the uneducated, unwashed boy from Hannibal, discovers that Jim is a man. That Jim is not a subspecies slave, that man has a soul. Today, on this Epiphany Day, and it is the official day of Epiphany, we celebrate perhaps the greatest expedition of all time. This expedition is usually misunderstood and trivialized. I have spent the last years of my life exploring this expedition and finding it more and more fascinating the more I find out. We all see it every Christmas in the nativity scene when we trivialize it by putting 3 kings on camels. What we should be celebrating is the search for truth, the search for light in the darkness. Shakespeare wrote, "This is the winter of our discontent," and today we are discontent with the world. Am I right? We may be a little discontent with our own lives. We may want to find truth and purpose. We may want to move from the trivial to the triumphant. Who among you wants the truth? Remember that famous scene in the movie, You Can't Handle the Truth. We talk about searchers for truth. Mark Twain once wrote, "We're always hearing about people who are around seeking the truth. I have never seen a permanent specimen." I think he has never lived. But I have seen several entirely sincere people who thought they were seekers for the truth. They sought diligently, persistently, carefully, cautiously, profoundly, with perfect honesty and nicely adjusted judgment, until they believed they had found the truth. That was the end of the search. The man spent the rest of his life hunting up shingles wherewith to protect the truth he had found from the weather. As hard as it is to find truth in the past, what about today? What about today? When misinformation and lies come at us with the speed of light, we have whole industries, folks, dedicated and with no other purpose than to scam you, to trick you into giving up your resources. Hundreds will spend their entire workday today spreading misinformation and lies. The Magi, or wise men of history, and the Bible were an ancient order of scientists, theologians, historians, librarians, linguists, astronomers, travelers, thinkers, philosophers, and politicians who had their headquarters in Babylon. Did you know the order is 3,000 years old? We know of people who were magi 3,000 years ago. Who were they? What were they all about? In their library, folks, they had every book that had ever been written up to that time. Let that sink in. Every book. They had observation towers at their headquarters and recorded events in the night sky with meticulous records. They could predict eclipses and other phenomena because they had advanced mathematics. We know the names of some of the Magi from history. Balaam, remember, from the Old Testament, that was asked to come by the kingdom of Moab and curse Israel. You probably remember Balaam because his donkey talked. Remember that? The only recorded donkey talking in all of history was Balaam's. He was a Magi. And one you may find absolutely fascinating was a Magi, was Daniel the prophet. From the Bible, the book of Daniel was written by a Magi. He was taken captive by the Babylonians, and when they arrived, they selected the best, and they were educated by the Magi through their educational system. The word Magi, the root, is the root word of our word today, magician. But magician seems to trivialize what these people were because there's no record of them doing sleight of hand or tricks. They were interested in something much bigger. In your imagination, go back with me 2,000 years. A young man, Bashan, walks past the night guard and greets his friend with the usual, "Good evening." He bounces up the flight of stairs, up to the observation deck. He picks up a piece of slate and some chalk. His task is to record even the smallest phenomena. He is instructed to draw the path of any shooting stars, and in his first year of observation 4 years ago, he was lucky enough to see a comet. Since then, all had been uneventful. The night is crystal clear. It's cool, but not cold. He walks over to the guardrail, peering east. The constellations are so bright. Can you imagine that with no ambient light? You ever thought of that? Our ancestors could feel like they could almost reach up and touch the constellations. They were so bright and magnificent. Many times throughout history, people describe the Milky Way as taking their breath away. He reaches his arm high as if he could actually touch the dog star. Then he turns west, stops. His knees buckle. He steadies himself, but he's trembling. He raises his head, and there is a new star. Large, out of place, menacing, dangerous. He turns and races down the stairs, 2 or 3 at a time. He ran to the master magician, Hamish. A new star, he gasps. Impossible, the old magi says. He rubs his arthritic hands and says, "Oh, all right," as he follows Bashan up those steps, higher and higher until they are 60 feet above the ground. And there it is. Undeniable. In the west, a new star. How? Why? It's impossible. It cannot be there, and it is menacing. Can you imagine seeing that and being an astronomer? Maybe it's heading toward Earth. Maybe this is a disaster looming. They watch it through the night. Is it getting closer? Is it a danger? What to do? The next days are frantic. Every one of their resources is called into play. They observe every night. It seems not to be getting closer. The librarians go to work. They search every book they can lay their hands on. The first book of the Hebrew Torah, they find, there shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. The mathematicians have a go at the book of Daniel with its timed prophecies. And they conclude that the timeline works. Then the discussions begin. The work begins. The organization turns into full force. What to do? What is it? What should we do about it? Now, we can simply sit in Babylon and watch this phenomenon. But it is the winter of our discontent. We're not quite happy with the world. We want to know. We are true searchers for truth, which means that we have to go. We must go. Now I want to point out something that is only speculation on my part. Remember when they get to Jerusalem and they talk with King Herod? And he asks them when they saw this star. After the Magi had left secretly, Herod goes and kills all the babies. How old? 2 and under. Why? You've ever wondered? Why not 1 and under? Why not 6 months and under? I think the Magi saw it 2 years before they arrived. That's just my opinion. And so in that winter of discontent, they are thorough. The Magi were no knee-jerk operation. They checked everything. They talked to everyone. They sent out their inquiries to their entire network. They rigorously researched. I think for a year. And then in that second winter of discontent, they got organized. After the committees, after all the meetings, after all the experts had given their opinion, they voted and they decided to go. Now, here is where this whole expedition takes its place right along with Lewis and Clark, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and all the other great adventures. Folks, it was going to be 2,000 miles. Over mountains, through deserts, into hostile territory, places that were riddled with bandits, and to hostile nations that might attack them. There were no inns in those days, 2,000 years ago, to stay. They were on their own. They had to mount an expedition. And so they put together all they needed, an army of servants, herdsmen, guides, cooks, hunters, to kill game for their meals along the way, tenters, camel drivers, and yes, soldiers, because they had much to protect, including treasure, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They were to travel 2,000 miles or more. We don't know how circuitous that journey was. What countries did they have to go around and not through? How many battles did they have to fight? Did you ever think of that? They were a very tempting target. When all was done that could be done, the old master Hamish says, I'm going too. I do not know what we're going to find, but I want to see for myself. And so, on a clear spring night, the caravan with Hamish and Bashan and 1,500 others left Babylon. Do you see what I mean by trivializing with three? This was a caravan, a scientific expedition with all the experts. And so 1,500 souls, one day, 6-7 months after they left, entered Jerusalem. Everyone knew about the caravan. 3 camels would get no notice in Jerusalem, but 1,500 did. It was the gossip, the speculation of the moment. Even King Herod met the Magi, called a priest and said, "Where is the king to be born?" And the priest said, "Bethlehem Ephrathah." And so the Magi went. By the way, not when they were in stable. The Bible clearly says they were in a house, the family, when the Magi arrived. Was it a month, 2 months later? We don't know. But they found him. And when they walked into that house in Bethlehem, Hamish had his epiphany. It all came together. He carried gold in his arthritic hands. He looked at the others, and in that moment of clarity, he said, I certify this search is over. We have found the King. And he placed his gold in front of the baby. His friends placed frankincense and myrrh. And by the way, these were not gifts. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh were tribute for their new king. By placing these, they pledged allegiance to their new king, the best they could provide from their treasure house. An epiphany is a sudden realization of the essential truth of the moment. It is the result, if it is real, of real vigor. No knee-jerk reaction, but 2 years of research. And then having the courage and the determination to go on a life-threatening trip to find it. We may have to reject many lies before we get at the truth. It's like the old fairy tale. You have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. The quest may not be easy. Are you ready this morning? In the winter of our discontent, is this the winter of your discontent? We started with Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I always, in my mind, like to finish it with Alfred Lord Tennyson. In his poem, Ulysses, he takes us back to Homer. In the poem, finally, Ulysses has returned home. An old man now, after all of his adventures. And he speaks. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in the old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to seek, to find, to strive, and never to yield on the truth.